Om, Amen. Well, welcome everyone to our Monday evening reading and discussion group of love poems from God. We're still with Meister Eckhart, I believe. And the poem we're about to read, if I'm not mistaken, we're on page 111. How then can we argue? Is that right, or am I mistaken about?
Well, you're right on that. Shankara, can I add something or request something?
Of course you may, dear.
Well, I think you got a copy of it too. June's poem.
Yes, I did, and I've asked that it be transcribed for me, and it hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
So I don't have the. Do you have a copy of her?
I have a copy of it.
Oh, then would you please read it for us?
I would love to.
Let's start with that.
Okay.
June, your question about whether this was appropriate for our group. It's so much more than just appropriate. It is a great contribution and the poem is titled Circles of Glass,
Yeah.
and Heidi will read it for us.
Yep. And June wrote this poem in 1975. And June, you're muted, so we're not going to be able to hear you. Okay. Circles of Glass. Lord, my new glasses are large and thick, circles of glass, enabling me to see, heavy as milk bottle bottoms, said he, with well-meant sympathy. Only you, Lord God, know how thankful I am for circles of glass, enabling me to see, to focus on the wonders of your earth, garbed in seasonal change, adorned for our eyes, to see, to respond in wonder and praise to your creativity. What will I do, Lord, when the black spots on my retina make my vision a blurred morass, and useless are my circles of glass? Will I no longer see? Unable to respond to thee. My God, you know how weak I am, full of good intentions now and then. But will I be resolute in my faith, with sight distorted beyond repair, reaching out in vacant stare? Will I turn away from your face, denying the fullness of your grace? Or is it possible, O Lord, when no longer my circles of glass I need, I will truly see, understanding your will for me? Perhaps there is another way of seeing, to see and know your bounty for me, fearfully dependent on circles of glass, heavy as milk bottle bottoms. Alas, alas.
June, thank you for that poem, and Heidi, thank you for that reading.
You're welcome.
You can see now what I meant, that this is an addition to what we are studying, because it fits exactly with the frame of reference that these saints come from, their worldview. seeing beyond. And seeing when there's only faith to allow us to see.
And I like too how June asks the question, will I no longer see, when the black spots on my retina make my vision blurred, a blurred morass. And then she answers her own question, so
Yes,
whether that was I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, I say whether that was a period of reflection or whatever, I don't know how that came about, June, how that came to you right away or some contemplation perhaps. But yeah, I like that you were able to answer your own question.
It just lets you know how June, that poem was written 46 years ago.
Yes.
In 1975, 46 years ago. How much June must have grown since then in her vision and in her faith. Jai, 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 June. So thank you for that poem, June. It's being transcribed by Jyoti Elizabeth Yates, but she didn't get it done yet. And I'll write you an email about publishing it in a publication for which I'm the coordinating editor. It's called American Vedantist. So, any other comments or anything to ask June about that poem?
June, are you able to unmute yourself? You're muted. I think she knows about where the button is, so.
No,
She's working on it, but.
I haven't seen the yellow square rectangle come around her
Okay.
Yet, so.
Okay.
Shankar, can you see the three little dots? Can you hover over her square and see the three little dots in the
Yes.
I think if you click on that, does it give you the option to unmute her?
It says ask to unmute.
Okay. I'm going to log out and log back in as you because I can unmute her. Okay. I'll be right back.
Very good. Thank you, dear. Well, let's just wait a minute because I would like June to have an opportunity to say something. And
Yeah,
Cindy will know how to do this.
Because I could just tell you from, June and I are in Elizabeth's yoga class, right?
Right.
And when June is muted, Elizabeth can't always unmute her, okay? As the I don't know what you call, like you, the Zoom person, okay, who invited us all. Elizabeth's not always able to do that. And June can feel around and she's pretty good at finding that unmute button, okay? She's gotten good at it. So that's why I was letting her know.
Well, she's working at it. I can see she's got her head down.
So
Cindy is somewhat more knowledgeable than your average bear about this Zoom business, but
Okay. And usually they unmute her when they get June logged in and set up, and they must have just forgot to do that tonight.
right.
So,
Well, in the meantime,
yeah.
while Cindy's working on that, I'm going to read this poem by Meister Eckhart. Oh, I see Cindy logging in. How then can we argue? Having lunch in a field one day, I troubled an ant with the question. I asked of him humbly, "Have you ever been to Paris?" And he replied, "No, but I wouldn't mind going." And then he asked me if I had ever been to a famous ant city. And I regretted that I hadn't, and was quick to add, I wouldn't mind too. This led to a conclusion. There is life that we do not know of. How aware are we of all consciousness in this universe? What percent of space is this earth in the infinite realm? What percent of time is 1 second in eternity? Less than that is our knowledge of God. How then can we ever argue about him? This again is a remarkable demonstration of a couple of things about Meister Eckhart. First of all, his omniscience. As an illumined soul, he is able to communicate with an ant. Because I don't think he's speaking metaphorically here. I think he means what he says. But then he generalizes the experience, which is what these people so beautifully do. How then can we argue? Having lunch in a field one day, I troubled an ant with a question. I asked of him humbly, "Have you ever been to Paris?" And he replied, "No, but I wouldn't mind going." And then he asked me if I had ever been to a famous ant city. And I regretted that I hadn't, and was quick to add, I wouldn't mind too. This led to a conclusion. There is life that we do not know of. How aware are we of all consciousness in this universe? What percent of space is this earth in the infinite realm? What percent of time is 1 second in eternity? Less than that is our knowledge of God. How then can we ever argue about him? Did we get June unmuted? Nope, apparently not. I see her trying to talk, but
Well, it looks like I can't do anything more than ask to unmute. Let
right.
me try something. I'm going to mute everybody. Uh, Mute all, and then, wow, that didn't work either. Um, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Can y'all hear me? Because I muted everybody. You can unmute yourself though. I think we have, I'm frozen.
We can hear you. I can hear you anyway.
I know my picture's frozen though. Oh gosh. I think it's because I'm logged in as you. I'm gonna log out and log back in as myself.
Okay.
Now you, oh, yeah, sorry.
So, anything at all about that poem? How can we argue? Oh,
I have one thing to say.
yes, honey.
This may be unrelated, but he mentioned about Paris, and it just made me think about kind of how there are many like Black intellectuals from Paris, and how, you know, minority groups, their stories are kind of underheard, and we don't really hear the full or appreciate the full scope of certain histories, just as if the ants were seen as kind of insignificant, um like certain groups are insignificant in history. I don't know if that makes sense. Or
Well, it certainly is an important observation. I don't know how much it relates to the poem directly, but it was definitely keyed by what you heard in the poem. So fine. Yes, there are many marginalized people, and what he's saying is that we're not aware of very much. You know, we're not aware of very much. We're not even aware of where the ants have famous cities, because that's what the ant said. Have you ever been to this famous ant city? No, but I wouldn't mind too. You know, Eckhart's sense of humor, I love it. So the ants, we tend to think of them as insignificant or just a problem. Anything else from anyone?
Maybe it's significant that he's willing to speak to an ant, and not only speak to the ant, but speak humbly to the ant.
Very, very well said, Janaki.
Because of that, he is invited to a whole new realm.
Yes.
And from the reader's standpoint, it's kind of really a fun sentence about being invited to a famous ant city. I mean,
Yes.
everyone has to love that.
Yes. Exactly.
So this is
Who
truly
knew
a
that
saint.
there was a famous ant city? I didn't know that. And I still don't know it except through Meister Eckhart's experience.
But he was so mannerly to the ant and regretted
yes.
that he hadn't been.
Well, you know, from the rest of his poetry, we see that he's mannerly with all creation because of his relationship to it.
And some might think that, you know, the ant in relation to the poet is like man's relationship to God in terms of magnitude, but really that's not even beginning to capture the scope, the difference in scope. And that's what I think he's pointing that out.
I think you're absolutely right. That thought had not occurred here, but I think you're absolutely right. Hmm. Hmm. Yes, we don't even know much about an ant. The life of an ant, how little we know about God. And yet God is concerned about us.
Yes.
Anything else from anyone? Well, June, it's just a darn shame that we can't hear you, because I really would like to hear from you. Maybe we can read your poem again next week. And when we do, then we'll make sure that we'll see if we can make sure that you're unmuted before the session begins. Because you're even more of a treasure to us now. Who would like to read the poem Expands His Being? Janaki, are you in a reading
I'd be
mood?
happy to.
Okay.
Okay. Expands his being. All beings are words of God. His music, his art. Sacred books we are, with the infinite camps in our souls. Every act reveals God and expands his being. I know that may be hard to comprehend. All creatures are doing their best to help God in his birth of himself. Enough talk for the night. He is laboring in me. I need to be silent for a while. Worlds are forming in my heart.
Now, we normally read the poems twice.
Okay. Expands his being. All beings are words of God, his music, his art. Sacred books we are, for the infinite camps in our souls. Every act reveals God and expands his being. I know that may be hard to comprehend. All creatures are doing their best to help God in his birth of himself. Enough talk for the night. He is laboring in me. I need to be silent for a while. Worlds are forming in my heart.
Hmm.
I, you most of it. I did do the sandwich and
Like the soup and stuff.
Swayam, you're here. Wonderful.
thank
Good,
you, Brother Shankara.
good,
But
good to hear your voice.
yeah, unfortunately, I'm not in a place or position to read. I just wanted to listen.
Yes, well, shall we say where you are and why?
I don't mind, but I don't want to spoil the mood of the group.
Well, Swayam is in the hospital. She's had some heart problems. And so she's, they're, they were doing some tests. I haven't heard the results.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the results showed multiple blocks, so they could not do the simple stenting. So it's also not in a position where they can easily do the bypass. So tomorrow they're having a meeting between the surgeon and the interventional cardiologist to see what options they can come up with. So it's kind of like the way the blocks are situated. It's not a straightforward treatment plan. So I don't know what they will come up with. I'm hoping that they'll figure something out. So
Well, I'm sure that all of our hearts are with you, Swayam.
thank you. And the reason I cannot read is because people keep coming and going, with the nurses and whoever. So
Yes, of course.
I
I remember well. In April of 2015, I had a quadruple bypass. I remember very well what it's like.
Right. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to listen to love poems from God, so I just thought I would join.
Well, I was just very glad to hear your voice and see your name on the screen.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
All of our thoughts are with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's what keeps me going.
All right. Every act reveals God and expands his being. I know that may be hard to comprehend. All creatures are doing their best to help God in his birth of himself. What an astounding few lines. And doesn't that ennoble us? As William Blake said, we ought to think of ourselves as highly as immortals ought to think. And then he finishes off this discussion, this brief discussion of creation, by saying, enough talk for the night. He is laboring in me. I need to be silent for a while. Worlds are forming in my heart. Creation, creation, creation. Anyone else have anything to say about this remarkable poem?
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
So, I remember you saying recently that the way home is known to us. It is in our heart. And you also kind of were saying, stop reading so many books, emphasize manana rather than shravana.
Yeah, emphasize assimilating it rather than just taking more in.
I like the sentence, sacred books we are. We are the sacred books.
Yes.
The infinite camps in our souls.
Yes, and that's a very good connection. For those of you who aren't part of the congregation and sometimes hear what these Sunday talks and classes have to say, there's a couple of words in Sanskrit, shravana and manana. Shravana means hearing or reading, particularly the truth, the sacred truth. And manana means taking that into our being, into our minds, but beyond just our minds, into our being, and assimilating it, making a part of it, making it a part of us as we do food when we digest it. So that's what Janaki was referring to. And a very good connection. Sacred books we are, for the infinite camps in our souls. Anybody else feel like saying anything?
Just that the sentence, every act reveals God and expands his being. I know that may be hard to comprehend. The hardest thing for people always seems to be to realize that you're not the doer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's saying doing is really God.
Mm-hmm. That's what it's saying. Cindy, are you in a reading mood?
I actually have a kind of a bad headache, so I'm
Oh, I'm
kind of,
sorry, dear. Bart, how about you? You feel like reading a plague?
Mm. Yes, Brother Shankara, certainly. A plague. What a cruel act to be untruthful. Earthquakes happen in the heart that hears sounds that are amiss. Havoc is created in the mind that can no longer trust someone once loved, and schisms devour alliances that help support our life. Words can enrich and be as wonderful spices mixed into the days we imbibe with all of our senses. There are fields in the soul, lush organic meadows. Those sounds and words that fall there can be, at times, a poison. A plague is spread by one who cannot tell the truth. And again, a plague. What a cruel act to be untruthful. Earthquakes happen in the heart that hears sounds that are amiss. Havoc is created in the mind that can no longer trust someone once loved, and schisms devour alliances that help support our life. Words can enrich and be as wonderful spices mixed into the days we imbibe with all our senses. There are fields in the soul, lush organic meadows. Those sounds and words that fall there can be, at times, a poison. A plague is spread by one who cannot tell the truth. I apologize. My dog is trying to make a commentary as I read here.
I'm very familiar with the dogs trying to get
Sorry.
our attention as we turn our attention elsewhere. No, that doesn't trouble me at all.
She's been quiet all this time until I unmuted myself.
Right.
Uh,
Anyone have anything to say about this remarkable poem?
Certainly seems to comment on our times.
Amen.
mm,
Our society is suffering from more than one plague. This plague of untruthfulness is truly causing a different kind of death in our society. Anyone else have anything to say about it?
Yes, I like the part about the middle of the poem where he says, "Words can enrich and be as wonderful spices mixed into the days we imbibe with all our senses." I just love how that I love that phrase. You know,
Yeah.
I mean that's a positive thing using our words. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And taking the spices like in a recipe, you know, and mixing them in with our days.
Mm-hmm.
I just think I like how that sounds and what that says.
Yes, and then he goes from the senses to our souls.
Right.
There are fields in the soul, lush organic meadows. It is said that we are at the end of an age. Mm, that we're in a kind of end times. This has been said many times before, and so it may not be true this time either. But out of the Indian tradition comes the thought that we're at the end of something called the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. And that one of the aspects of this Iron Age, there are said to be 4 pillars of the temple of righteousness. This is one way of metaphorizing it. 4 pillars of a righteous life, of a righteous way of living. The 4th of which is truthfulness. And it's said in the 3 earlier ages, the 3 other virtues or pillars of the temple of Dharma, as it's called in Sanskrit, were removed. And now the final pillar is crumbling. And I think that this is what Meister Eckhart is remarking on. This change of an age doesn't happen in 5 years or 50 years or even 500 years. So truthfulness, the lack of truthfulness. How does he close it? A plague is spread by one who cannot tell the truth. Everything I see, hear, touch, feel, taste, speak, think, imagine is completing a perfect circle God has drawn. Everything I see, hear, touch, feel, taste, speak, think, imagine is completing a perfect circle God has drawn. Once again, the idea comes up of who is doing the doing? Who is creating the capacity for seeing, hearing, touching, feeling, tasting, speaking, thinking, imagining? And this is one of the things that these poets, these illumined souls tell us over and over, that that God is the creative force. God is the manifesting force. In a word, God is the doer. Anyone have any remarks on that? Short but very punchy poem. By punchy, I meant punches us right in the ego. Folks are feeling pretty quiet tonight. Maybe
It,
all of
it,
us, in one sense or another, have a headache.
it makes me think of Krishna.
In what sense?
In the sense that, you know, I guess some of the previous poems showed this as well, where everything was going, that when Krishna had revealed Arjuna to him, he had shown that the entire universe was inside of him, and that all the warriors were going inside of him, and all the, you know, not like the warriors who were killed in battle were cycling through Krishna as the ultimate mover of the individual and of society.
Thank you, Sunny. And for those of you who don't know that much about the figure of Krishna, Krishna is the creator God, the God of. He's a human like Christ was an incarnation of the Father. So Krishna is an incarnation of the Father, and is therefore, as Sunny just pointed out, all the doing is within him. All of the activities of universe are from him and within him, within that perfect circle. Thank you, Sunny.
Gives you the feeling that everything is intended.
Everything is
Intended.
yes, yes.
And with the perfect circle, there's no beginning and no end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of outside of time and space as well.
Mm-hmm. Very well remarked. So all of this that it seems to be within time and space, all those things he lists in the first stanza, is simply completing something that is beyond, that is infinite, as you said, is without beginning, without end. Now here's the through line. You know, we had the poem A Plague. Then we had a poem saying, even that is completing a perfect circle that God has drawn. It's not apart from it. So now we have this poem, An Insidious Idol, which is, in poetic terms, it's a broadside. It is a judgment and condemnation and yet it must be part of that perfect circle. This is the genius of Ladinsky, how he arranges these poems to illustrate the through line of these saints' thinking. Who'd like to read this one? An insidious idol. Liam, you feeling like reading?
I'm not in a position to read right now, so I'm just.
Oh, okay.
I'll read it.
Okay. Liam must be standing on his head.
Let me see. Let me pull it up. It is, what's it called?
It's called An Insidious Idol, and it's on page 115.
Okay. Huh. My Kindle app is being funny. Okay, it's 114 for me. Okay. Oh, I'm not visible. Okay. Here I am. An insidious idol. Commerce is supported by keeping the individual at odds with himself and others, by making us want more than we need, and offering to buy what refined senses do not want. The masses become shackled. I see how their eyes weep and are desperate. Of course they feel desperate for something, for some remedy that a poor soul then feels needs to be bought. I find nothing more offensive than a God who would condemn human instincts in us that time, in all its wonder, have made perfect. I find nothing more destructive to the well-being of life than to support a God that makes you feel unworthy and in debt to it. I imagine erecting churches to such a strange God will assure endless wars that commerce loves. A God that could frighten is not a God, but an insidious idol and weapon in the hands of the insane. A God who talks of sin is worshipped by the infirm. I was once spiritually ill. We all pass through that. But one day, the intelligence in my soul cured me.
Please do read it again.
An insidious idol. Commerce is supported by keeping the individual at odds with himself and others, by making us want more than we need and offering credit to buy what refined senses do not want. The masses become shackled. I see how their eyes weep and are desperate. Of course they feel desperate for something, for some remedy that a poor soul then feels needs to be bought. I find nothing more offensive than a God who would condemn human instincts in us that time, in all its wonder, have made perfect. I find nothing more destructive to the well-being of life than to support a God that makes you feel unworthy and in debt to it. I imagine erecting churches to such a strange God will assure endless wars that commerce loves. A God that could frighten is not a God, but an insidious idol and weapon in the hands of the insane. A God who talks of sin is worshipped by the infirm. I was once spiritually ill. We all pass through that. But one day, the intelligence in my soul cured me.
Wonderfully read. Cindy. Thank you. Beautiful.
That's one of my faves.
Mhm.
It so describes life in the material world today.
Yeah, but he wrote this. When did he live? In the 13th century?
Something like
It's
that.
nothing new.
Yeah.
Nothing new.
Yeah.
Madison Avenue didn't invent the credit card. Is that
Yes.
one of your cats,
She
Dan?
wants me to let her out. I'm going to let her out.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Cindy has a cat named Twee that is extremely vocal. Anyone else have anything to say about this poem and its timelessness?
I have two comments.
Yes, please, Sonny.
I guess these things are quite apparent based upon the poem that they're talking about materialism. And when I think of what the intelligent of life is, or of the source of life, I forget what the phrase is. I think of compassion. And when I go back to the beginning of the poem, when they talk about the problems with commerce, it makes me think of the problems with global capitalism and how people have said that capitalism has kind of taken us away from the fundamental human nature of compassion and has made us believe in kind of some semblance of self-interest, which is not wholly correct, I assume.
Very well said, Sonny. Both of those things. Yes, predatory capitalism has been both the plague that that he spoke of in the one poem, and then it's created these insidious idols.
There's hope in the poem because the intelligence in the poet's soul cured him.
Yes,
Much
this
like
is
in,
what,
like
yeah,
in the prior
go
poem.
ahead. Go ahead and expand on that, please, John.
Well, much like in the prior poem, expand his being, sacred books we are for the infinite camps in our souls.
Mhm.
And that's the source, really. You yourself is the divine, or the divine. And one day the intelligence in my soul cured me. Rather than looking outwardly, the inward look is what the salvation is.
And it's interesting that a God who talks of sin is worshipped by the infirm, that is, people who are ill. I was once spiritually ill. We all pass through that. It's interesting how he returns to this theme of that, drawing that circle. I mean, he doesn't say it explicitly, but I hear that. That's just part of the circle being drawn. But you don't hear Eckhart very often talk about what offends him. I find nothing more destructive to the well-being of life than to support a God that makes you feel unworthy and in debt to it. Oh, hallelujah.
I was thinking that if you just read this to me and said, "Guess who wrote this?" I didn't know. I would guess Vivekananda could have said this or written this.
Oh, that's
You know,
very true.
a-
Or
absolutely.
Jeremiah.
Yeah. The connection of it's amazing through the ages. This one voice that it achieves a certain pitch, and that we can all recognize it through the centuries.
Mm-hmm. Very well said, Bart. Very well said. Because they are illumined, because they speak from that place of illumination. And this is what he said. This is what he means when he said, I was once ill. Jan, I'm in class. I'll call you back. That was my sister Janice. She forgot it was class night. So we've got just a few minutes left.
As Bart said, Brother Shankara, um, weren't most of the prophets, such as Vivekananda, against temples and churches, or did they believe it was a stage in development one had to go through before?
Not against, but
Okay.
what Vivekananda said, that's secondary details. And he explains in another place the reason for them and why it's good to have them, because they're a place that contains and concentrates that spirit of worship that is so soothing to us. He calls it the tanmatras of sattva. This is his Sanskrit words for the presence that is left in places of worship that is so beneficial to us. And you can feel it. You go into any great church where the spirit is truly worshipped, and you feel it. You feel it. But he said there's secondary details. What really matters is the journey within. Whichever path you take to the journey within is, and that's how that's how this poem ends. I was once spiritually ill. We all pass through that. But one day the intelligence in my soul cured me. Well, he didn't find that intelligence in his soul by continuing to focus his attention outside. He found it by focusing inside through contemplation, prayer, meditation.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, June, next week, we hope to have you unmuted so that we can have a conversation with you. And next week, your poem will be read again for everyone. Your beautiful poem, Circles of Glass, written 46 years ago. And here she is still with us, celebrating the life of the Spirit, which is what that poem essentially celebrates. That it is the spirit, it is the life of the spirit that will ultimately give you the vision that really matters.
And just a quick comment too about that, this last poem, how I think Jennifer was saying, it's like you know, and the poet said, you find it within.
Mm-hmm.
I think June found her answer within also. When
Yes.
she was questioning the Lord, you know, about losing her sight and what if this and that.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the parallel in June's poem with these last couple poems as well.
Absolutely.
So maybe you can read it next week, Shankara.
Okay, dear. So next week we'll start with June's poem, and then we'll read Meister Eckhart's An Image That Makes Them Sad, which is a short poem but so poignant. So anything else from anyone? Okay, we have a prayer that we close our Sunday talks with, and I'm going to recite that prayer for us tonight because I think that under the circumstances of the world that we're living in right now, that for all of us to radiate the feeling that is in this poem will be beneficial not only to us but to the world. And this is a very ancient prayer, very ancient chant, and it's the translation of the man who founded, the translation is by the man who founded this center, whose name was Swami Yogeshananda. He's on February the 3rd, he will turn 98 years old. He doesn't live here anymore, of course. He lives at a monastery in Southern California. This is a prayer for peace. Let there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let that infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So good night to you. So glad you were able to be with us this evening. And to share these treasures among ourselves as these great poets and their wonderful works is really a wonderful way to spend time together. So until next time,
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
good night, dears.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Hearts back at you, Cindy.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, and I hope your headache gets better, dear.
Thank you. It will.
Okay.
Always does.
Okay, yeah, but soon. I mean, soon.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.